So the scripture this morning comes from Lamza, 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 6 through 15. Paul writes, "But remember this, he who sows sparingly shall reap also sparingly, and he who sows generously shall reap also generously. So let every man give according to what he has decided in his mind, not grudgingly or of necessity, for God loves a cheerful giver. God is able to make all goodness abound to you, and may you always have enough of everything for yourselves, and may you abound in every good work. As it is written, he has distributed liberally and given to the poor, and his righteousness endures forever. Now he who gives seed to the sower and bread for food will supply and multiply your seed and cause the fruits of your righteousness to grow, that you may be enriched in everything, in all liberality, for such generosity enables us to perfect thanksgiving to God. For the administration of this service not only supplies the wants of the saints, but it also is made abundant by the many thanksgivings to God. And by this experiment of charitable service, they glorify God in that you have subjected yourselves to the faith of the gospel of Christ, and through your generosity, you have become partakers with them and with all people. And they offer prayer on your behalf with greater love because of the abundance of the grace of God, which has been given on you. Thanks be to God for this incomparable gift." That is 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 6 through 15, written by the Apostle Paul, the Lamza version. Now, about a month ago, I was reading a newspaper and came across one of my favorite advice columnists. It's not too scandalous. It's by a writer named Carolyn Hacks. And she got this letter, and it was part of her online forum. And the writer wrote, "Dear Carolyn, is indulging in a little schadenfreude such a bad thing? Through friends, I just found out that my cheating ex-husband lost his job and the woman he cheated with lost her business, so they will be losing their home soon. My friends say they will be moving in with her parents, who are not happy about this. I had a chuckle at the news because it's nice to see jerks get the bad luck they deserve now and then. My boyfriend even bought the table a round of drinks and we all toasted their bad luck. Now, my sister didn't say anything at the time, but later said she's appalled about my still being so bitter. She suggested that I'm asking for bad karma by laughing at someone else's misfortune. And her attitude left me floored. I don't spend a lot of time thinking about my ex or his girlfriend, who before I found out about the cheating was my best friend and business partner. But when this news came my way, it did make me smile. Do I really have to wish well for people who lied to me and deliberately betrayed me just to be considered a decent person?" Signed, Schadenfreude. Well, Carolyn's answer was, "To Schadenfreude, it wasn't your best moment, and there's no way to argue it was. But this was also an excellent opportunity for your sister to zip it and let you be flawed for one lousy round of drinks, assuming it was just this once." And someone followed up in the comments, "This was just a one-time indulgence and well-deserved. You're human. After the karma bus ran over your ex and his girlfriend, the driver honked and waved. You waved back. I would have done the same." To which someone else added, "Does the karma bus take passengers?" I hope that letter wasn't from anybody in the congregation, because, the Washington Post is a hometown newspaper, but sometimes just expressing it and getting some good advice is enough. And I hope I didn't take you back to a moment, but I found value in that letter. So if you are in this audience reviewing, one of our viewers, or watching this later on YouTube, I want to thank you, because it was important enough for me to think more deeply. And that's what I love about this particular advice column with Carolyn Hacks, because she is not unlike what we see in the back of our bulletin here. She drills everything down to it's almost like a secular humanist approach, but personal responsibility, how to conduct yourself with integrity, mutual respect of all parties involved. So Carolyn's column, it addresses the here and the now. It's dealing with the physical plane. But me, reading always with the metaphysical eye, or as much as I can, I see the potential of the scenario, which is how it found its way into this sermon this morning. Because not only to talk about what she did, she addressed it was a possible trend for future behavior. So provided another opportunity for the writer to reflect back. Is this a trend or is this just a one-time thing? But I think it also metaphysically, which is beyond the scope of what Ms. Hacks addresses in her column, I think it also speaks to, on a metaphysical level, to what is our default setting. And I guess she did a little bit with, if it's not the first, if it's the only time, but if it speaks to our default setting as individual people. Now, a former First Lady, this is related, has a new book out, and listening to a radio interview of hers, she described that the book was, or explained how the book was kind of spurred by when she was First Lady, that she was constantly being asked for her official response to the news, to events. Sometimes it was just comments about her. And she said she always had her first reaction, and then she would stop and say, now, what is the reaction that I can have that is going to do the best good? And she realized that she really was working to make sure that trying to get what would be the reaction that will do the best good be that first reaction. So sometimes when people say, well, it's only natural that you smiled and brought around a drinks for your thing, it may have been human, but does it have to be natural? Because we have our human nature, we have our spiritual nature. And so I think even this First Lady is addressing that I can have my first response or my official response come initially from my higher nature. Now, looking back at this scenario in the advice column, like I said, it's a natural, because that was an illustration of human beings having a human experience. And it was a natural human experience. Now, those of you who've been here before and have heard my sermons, I like to go back to a neurology example about grumpy old men, grumpy old people in our family who say inappropriate things. They sometimes say hurtful things, and it's because we have a executive function. There's a hormone that regulates our executive function. It's that thing that makes you, give you that first impression that maybe not so nice, but then that higher level of thinking, executive function, might say, that's not the best thing to say. And so sometimes you wrestle with it and squash down that initial one, or you just censor or edit yourself and put out the other, and put out the best thing, but the best response. But obviously, sometimes when grandma gets ornery and mean, sometimes it is, it's because that didn't just happen because they were old. It's because that executive functioning, that hormone that regulates it, it dials down when we get older. That was always there. And so that is my concern when I drive in traffic. Someone cuts me off. You've heard me say, or someone cuts the line at the grocery store, and I try not to. And if I find myself having some generalized, broad thought about that person, which is totally unwarranted, I really wrestle with myself there in the moment, because I don't want to be that old man who suddenly those things come out of me, because that frightens me. That is me wrestling with my human experience, as long as I'm a spiritual being here having a human experience. But metaphysically, and you guys are here because you recognize you are spiritual beings having a human experience. For whatever reason, it is your intent. It is your co-creation, what that human experience shall be. And you are also aware that it is your personal responsibility to make sure that it is your natural response is coming from your spiritual nature. It is, so faced with this scenario, we want our spiritual selves to be the one to step forward and say, I've got this. How comforting that is. And it's not easy, right? Because if it were easy, we would probably all just float up and this church would be empty. So we are here for the duration to continue one of those lessons, one of those lifetime courses for as long as we're here for our assigned period. Now, going to our cornucopia, because I put it on the front, I filled in some negative space, Reverend Nancy, in the bulletin with another image of a cornucopia. Where does this come? And what does this have to do with giving, and what we're putting out into the world? Well, the cornucopia, if you don't know, forgot your mythology from high school. Baby Zeus was hiding out. He was hidden away. And if you want to know more about that, I can give you a little bit more background on why Baby Zeus was having to hide away, and down at fellowship after church. But Baby Zeus was being hidden away, and a nanny goat, and not just any nanny goat wandering out. This was obviously a nanny goat of the supreme order, and it had a name and an identity and a personality. But this nanny goat was assigned to nurse Zeus and feed him. And Baby Zeus somehow grabbing hold of one of the nanny goat's horns, breaks it off. And out of this goat horn fills all sorts of food of abundance, never ending, for Baby Zeus to grow up and become that character that became Zeus, who sat on Mount Olympus later. But I look at that is this cornucopia. It has since become obviously used for Thanksgiving and for abundance. And so when I think about the cornucopia, I really think about what came out of that goat's horn was what was needed for Zeus. And obviously this nanny goat, her nature was there. Her intentions were to take care of and supply nourishment for the baby Zeus. Because that was what her initial intent was. That's what came out of abundance of the cornucopia. Now, we believe that we are co-creators, that we don't believe in an external God. And so when we reference God in our readings or our hymns, it's not just God way far away on Mount Olympus or on a chair somewhere with this long beard. We don't even believe God, even though it says he in some of our readings. We believe in a non-personified God, but that abundance is ever available and available to us. So we often think of the God that is ready at our hands and available and using him. And we work with that God, that divine inheritance that is within us. Nobody here is so powerful that they could block out God ever in their life. God was already there. So our job is to let the God out. It always amused me, made me curious as a young boy in church, if I knew already, thanks to my mom, that God was everywhere, even inside the coffee table, when I knocked on it and asked, is God in here? She very confusedly said, well, yes. So if God was everywhere, why was the minister week after week telling us to let God into our hearts? How was I so powerful that I could block out the Almighty? Because it wasn't it. It took me a good while to realize that, no, I have to take the padlock or whatever it is, the error thinking, and let the God out. And if we become cornucopias, we are cornucopias, each and every one of us, what my intent is, just like the nanny goat, is going to fuel what I put out in the world, what is in abundance. I love the old doxology, which we don't use. We use the melody in our hymn number 1, but the original line used in most Protestant Catholic churches, the first line is, praise God from whom all blessings flow. And I love that because it's a really great metaphor that we want blessings. Anything that comes out of my cornucopia is a blessing from the God that I employ, the God that I am utilizing and tapping into for the greater benefit of not just my spiritual experience, but the world around me. So unlike Zeus, helpless baby Zeus, passively feeding from the cornucopia. Like I said, we are personally responsible for what comes out of our cornucopia. Now, this sermon could be, and I have given sermons in the past on the parables of the sower. It was in our responsible reading, the parable of the sower, that be cautious of where you sow my seeds. And the sermon I gave on that, I talked about how my mother, she wasn't careful about where she sowed her seeds. She sowed liberally. And if you were a stony-hearted, like the stony pathway, she would still put a seed on you, just in the hopes that perhaps there was a crack there. She had plenty of seeds to give. Or there's the other one, I've given sermons on that, the rich man who left his servants with talents, which is a great metaphor with blessings and talents, but it also was a legitimate currency back in the day. And the master told the three of them to invest, if you remember those. And one of them put it in a bank, one of them bought I think a fish market, and the other buried in the ground. So the master was when the master, the head honcho of the household came back, rewarded those who had multiplied and used their talents, and spurned the one who buried their talents into the ground. So again, when we think about ourselves being a cornucopia, and we go back to the situation in the vice column, how does this tie in? Because there were alternatives for the celebrants. Another comment wrote from a similar experience in the comments. They wrote, "I don't wish them ill." Speaking of their own ex and the person that they cheated with and then eventually got married to. "I don't wish them ill, but I don't wish them well either. I don't think I'm required to be that evolved, and neither am I proposing that necessarily." If you can get to a point where your boss, I still have a boss that did me wrong, I left him there, and I'm not cheering on him to do better business at the office I left, and I don't wish him well either. But there are more evolved and useful alternatives to us and personally, and those immediately around us. It doesn't have to be for the offending parties. The case in point, compassion. It's useful. Like I said, it's emotionally safe. So instead of a round of drinks, how about compassion for someone who has fallen even further from a stable life? That takes our gift of empathy. It takes our gift of curiosity to see something from another that we don't understand, or to see something from a different perspective. How about compassion for the parents with limited income? How about compassion for the spirit, which still struggles to live in harmony with divine law? Now, getting that to be your first reflex when you haven't been thinking about somebody and you get this news and you smile a little, that's not easy for a human having a human experience. And even as this first lady wrote, a lot of times the official response wasn't her real, genuine response to events. But when we come from a spiritual perspective, could have smiled, but all it would have taken is one person, perhaps even that sister, to say, "Boy, I feel sorry for those parents." It would have totally changed the direction. So in a nutshell, remember that old saying, we are what we eat. And if we are what we eat, my cornucopia, your cornucopia, our cornucopia, manifest what we feed it, and it feeds us in return, but it also feeds the world at large. Now consider, and this goes back to that round of drinks, consider Matthew 12:43-45. When an unclean spirit has gone out of a person, it passes through waterless places, seeking rest, but finds none. Then it says, "I will return to my house from which I came." And when it comes, it finds the house empty, swept and put in order. Then it comes back and it brings 7 other spirits more evil than itself, and they enter and dwell there. And the last state of that person is worse than the first. Now, I love this because this doesn't talk about demonic impression. It really talks about what we as human beings are want to do is, "Oh, I'm so glad I got that off my chest. I said it once." But when you put that out there, it is, you think you're releasing it, but it goes somewhere. You all, if I just said something untoward about someone else or situation, or even my boss, right? I kind of said that I love my last boss, but I put it out there. It's like the saying, chickens come home to roost, right? So the spirit goes out and it cannot find sustenance to grow in anybody else. Sometimes it can, but I think those people already had a similar spirit, a nature, mindset in them. But what it does is think about that table with the drinks, is suddenly it came out, one person brought around the drinks, but 7 people suddenly had a different perspective. A round of drinks became more than a round of drinks. Everyone at that table has learned, who raised their glass, has learned something about each other. For me, if I'd been at that table, I would have said, wow, I think I just realized I'm saying you can't count on me to be compassionate if I do something wrong, and I get my comeuppance, or if the consequences for my behavior happen. So that was kind of my perspective of the missing of the missed opportunity there. Now, there is that old story, you hear this from time to time, and it's attributed to the Cherokee, the Lenape. I did a lot of research. I actually asked a friend who works with a Native American council, and he said, it's not that old. We don't know where it comes from, but even we say it's a Cherokee or Lenape saying. And that's the story about the grandfather who tells his grandson about the 2 wolves. The wise old grandfather says, grandson, inside every person, there are 2 wolves. You should know this, 2 wolves fighting each other. One is full of hatred and fear and anger and greed, and the other one is full of love and compassion and joy and kindness. And the grandson says, gosh, grandfather, which one wins? And the grandfather says, whichever one you feed. The same as our cornucopia. Well, I'm grateful that I found this church as a 20-something-year-old back in the 90s, and I'm grateful I had the chance to share with you as a 56-year-old down in the 2020s, because in the church I grew up in, this sermon and this idea would have been a fire and brimstone, because the perspective would have been, your all tendency is to go in the wrong direction, to choose the wrong path, to give into error thinking. Every one of us is here because we realize we have that human tendency, but we also have that innate spiritual desire to choose the right path, to lead with the spiritual force. And that is what we're here to mutually support each other, to mutually seek more insight into. So I love the fact that in any other church, this would have been a dire warning to each of you, sinners in the hand of an angry God, and it is not. We are celebrants at, basking in the glow, and we want to know, how can we amplify that? Because again, the image of a cornucopia is a horn, and what does a horn do? It amplifies. And that is what we want to do. We want to amplify the divine. So just like that first lady deciding her official responses, we all need to take advantage of that second chance. Don't beat yourself up for that pause and that reframing. That is an understandable human reaction. Pause, consider, and go forth with your innate spiritual response. As long as we are human beings having a human experience, this will be a lifelong effort, like I said. I promise you a successful effort. Going back to the scripture, Paul was writing to his church in Corinth and Greece, and things were going really well there. He was one of the 12, but someone in the congregation decided to turn against him, decided, I got a better way. They tried to take over the church. And as a minister, it's like, this always boggles my mind, because what chance do I have in the year 2022 when somebody who learned at the master teacher's feet and is teaching like as close to the product as you can possibly get can't keep his congregation in line in Greece? Now, granted, it was evolved from Judaism, but he founded that church, and there was somebody who's like, no, I got a better way. We're going to do it this way. So eventually, that person was escorted out of the church. But by that time, Paul had said, I'm never going to return. So he's writing these letters, 1 Corinthians and 2 Corinthians. 2 Corinthians especially was written in Macedonia, in northern Greece. And when he got the word, he wrote these words. Now, I will be honest, there are parts in 2 Corinthians where Paul, he was human, having a human experience. He had some bitter writing about the situation in Corinth, and especially that person who was his rival and was trying to had taken over the church and redesigning it in that person's own image. But eventually, when he finds the good news, and it is easy to gloat in victory, or to be generous, it's easy to be generous in victory, is it not? But to Paul's credit, he doesn't mention this person. He's looking forward now that he is back in stewardship of his church in Corinth. And he's written all these wonderful words. And I want to just kind of read the first two. But remember this, he who sows sparingly shall reap also sparingly, and he who sows generously shall reap also generously. For the administration of this service not only supplies the wants of the saints, but it's also made abundant. Thanks be to God for this incomparable gift, and adding to my 2 cents, because it's the gift that keeps on giving.